Strange tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese, Strange Tales from Liao Zhai. Today, I'm going to bring you a story called Chen Xijiu. Chen Xijiu was a native of Pizhou. His father, Chen Zian, was a well-known scholar in the county and enjoyed a certain reputation. In the same county lived a wealthy man named Zhou, who admired Chen Zian's name and offered his daughter's hand to Chen Xijiu, thus joining the two families in marriage. However, Chen Zian repeatedly failed the imperial examinations, and over time the family's fortunes declined. Eventually, he decided to travel to Shaanxi to study, but once he left, he disappeared for years without a word. Zhou began to have second thoughts about the engagement. Earlier, Zhou's second daughter had married Wang, a county juren degree holder, as his second wife. The Wang family's betrothal gifts were lavish, and the wedding procession, filled with horses, carriages, and pomp, was truly a spectacle. This only deepened Zhou's disdain for the now impoverished Chens, and he finally made up his mind to break off the marriage. He asked his daughter for her opinion. To his surprise, she stood her ground and refused to call it off. Zhou, furious, made her change into coarse homespun clothing and married her to Chen Xijiu without providing even a single coin's worth of dowry. After the wedding, the Chens became so poor that they could barely put food on the table. Zhou refused to help in any way. One day, he sent an old maid to bring food to his daughter. The moment she stepped inside, she said to Chen Xijiu's mother, "The master sent me to see if the young lady has starved to death yet." Zhou's daughter, not wanting to embarrass her mother-in-law, forced a smile, changed the subject, and brought out the food the maid had carried in, setting it respectfully before her mother-in-law. But the maid immediately blocked her and, in a sharp voice, said, "Don't you dare. Ever since you married into the Chen family, not even a drop of water from your in-laws has entered our Zhou household. Do you think the old madam here has the face to eat what we brought?" Chen's mother turned pale with anger, but the maid kept at it, growing more vicious with every word. At that moment, Chen Xijiu returned. When he heard what had happened, rage flared in his eyes. He stormed over, grabbed the maid by the hair, slapped her hard several times, and threw her out of the house. The very next day, Zhou came to take his daughter home. She refused to go. On the third day, he arrived again, this time with an even bigger group, acting as if they were ready for a brawl. Chen's mother urged her daughter-in-law to return to her parents' home for a while to avoid trouble. Helpless, Zhou's daughter tearfully bid farewell to her mother-in-law and boarded the carriage. A few days later, Zhou's family sent men to force Chen Xijiu to write a letter of divorce. Chen's mother, powerless to resist, made her son write it and hand it over. She kept hoping her husband, Chen Zian, would return so they could somehow restore her son's marriage. But not long after, news came from Zian. Chen Zian had died years earlier. Overcome with grief and indignation, Chen's mother fell ill and soon passed away. Chen Xijiu, torn between sorrow and anxiety, still clung to the hope that his wife might come back. But as the days slipped by with no word from her, that hope grew faint, and bitterness took root in his heart. At last, he sold the family's few remaining acres of thin farmland, bought a coffin, and buried his mother. Once the funeral was done, he resolved to travel to Shaanxi to recover his father's remains. On the road, he survived by begging, sleeping in the open, exposed to wind and rain. At long last, he reached Xi'an and began asking everyone he met about his father. Some locals told him that years ago, a scholar had indeed died in a roadside inn and been hastily buried just outside the city's eastern outskirts. By now, they said, the grave would have long since vanished. Unable to locate the site, Xijiu continued to beg for food by day and sleep in ruined temples at night, holding on to the faint hope that he might meet someone who knew exactly where his father's bones lay. One night, as Xijiu was passing through a desolate graveyard, a group of men suddenly blocked his path, glaring at him with menace. "Pay up for your food," one of them snarled. Xijiu frowned. "I'm a stranger here," he said. "In and around this city, I survive only by begging. When have I ever owed you a single meal?" His words only made them angrier. Without another word, they grabbed him and slammed him to the ground. One of them snatched up a filthy scrap of cotton cloth, wrapped around the body of a stillborn infant, and stuffed it into his mouth. Xijiu thrashed and struggled, but they were far too strong. His strength ebbed away, his vision dimmed, death was closing in. Just then, the men cried out in sudden panic, "The constables are coming!" Releasing him at once, they vanished into the darkness. Moments later, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the night. A carriage halted by the roadside, and a deep voice from within demanded, "Who's that lying over there?" The attendants hurried over, lifted Xijiu to his feet, and brought him to the carriage. The man inside leaned forward, peering at him, and said with anger in his tone, "This is my son. And those wretches dared to treat him like this? Go, bring them all in, not one is to escape." Through his haze, Xijiu felt the foul cloth being pulled from his mouth. Air rushed into his lungs, and he gasped for breath. When he could finally see clearly, he stared in shock. Before him sat his own father. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing aloud. "Father, I've suffered so much, all to find your remains. I never dreamed you were still alive." His father let out a quiet sigh. "I am not alive. I now serve as the chief overseer in the underworld. I came tonight for your sake." At these words, Xijiu's grief only deepened. Even though his father tried to comfort him, he could not stop crying, and between sobs, he told the whole story of how his father-in-law had forced him to divorce his wife. His father listened, then said gently, "You need not grieve. Your wife is with your mother now, and your mother longs to see you. Go to her." With that, his father waved his hand, and attendants helped Xijiu into the carriage. In the next instant, horses and carriage lifted from the ground and sped through the air. Before long, the carriage came to a halt before an official residence. Following his father, Xijiu stepped down, crossed several thresholds, and entered the main hall. There, seated in dignity, was his mother. The moment he saw her, grief welled up even stronger within him. He dropped to his knees and wept bitterly. Only after repeated words of comfort from his father did he begin to calm. Then, glancing up, he saw his wife standing quietly beside his mother. Startled, he blurted out, "Mother, how is my wife here? Could it be, she has passed away too?" His mother shook her head gently. No. Your father brought her here especially. When you return home, she will go back with you. Xijiu lowered his head in thought for a moment, then said solemnly. Mother, I don't wish to return. I want to stay here to serve you and father. His mother spoke earnestly. And why did you endure all those hardships to come here? Was it not to find your father's remains? If you do not return now, what becomes of the oath you swore? Besides, your filial devotion has moved heaven itself. The heavenly emperor will reward you with 10,000 caddies of gold. You and your wife will have a life of comfort ahead of you. How can you say you will not go back? Tears dripped one by one onto the floor, but Xijiu remained silent. Seeing this, his father's brows furrowed. Enough. Go now, don't delay. Overcome with sorrow, Xijiu burst into loud sobs. His father's face darkened, his voice turning stern. Are you truly refusing to leave? Struggling to hold back his grief, Xijiu wiped his tears and finally asked. Then, where exactly are your remains buried? His father took his hand and said quietly. When you return to the graveyard in the mortal world, walk 100 paces east. There you'll find 2 white elm trees, one large, one small. My bones rest beneath them. With that, he pulled Xijiu along toward the door, not even giving him the chance to bid his mother farewell. Outside, a broad-shouldered servant stood waiting beside a tall steed. His father pointed to the horse and instructed. Tonight, I've prepared some travel funds where you're lodging. Once you return, waste no time. Pack your things and go to your father-in-law's house to reclaim your wife. If they refuse, do not give in easily. Xijiu nodded firmly, mounted the horse, and turned to take one last look at his father, but before he could, the horse leapt forward, galloping away like the wind. Before dawn, just as the first rooster crowed, the horse carried Xijiu back to the outskirts of Xi'an. The servant helped him dismount. He opened his mouth, intending to ask the man to give his regards to his parents, but when he turned his head, both servant and horse had vanished without a trace. He found the same crumbling temple where he had rested before, sat down against the wall to doze while waiting for daylight. Yet something the size of a fist kept poking into his backside. When morning finally broke, he looked and realized, it was a silver ingot. With that ingot, Xijiu bought a coffin and hired a cart. He went straight to the spot beneath the 2 elm trees, and sure enough, found his father's remains there. Carefully, he gathered the bones and transported them back to his hometown, where his parents could be buried together. By the time the funeral rites were complete, the silver was gone, and the family was still penniless. Fortunately, the villagers respected Xijiu's filial devotion. They brought him food, ensuring he wouldn't go hungry for the time being. Once things settled, Xijiu began thinking about retrieving his wife from his father-in-law's house. After much thought, he realized he was too weak to act alone. So he called upon his cousin, Xijiu, to accompany him. Xijiu was a brash man, fearless and hot-tempered. The 2 of them arrived at the Zhou residence, only to be blocked at the gate by the doorkeeper. Xijiu wasn't about to take that kind of insult. He exploded, cursing so fiercely and crudely that the doorkeeper's face turned green, and the entire Zhou household was thrown into an uproar. Hearing the commotion, Zhou finally sent someone out with a message. Chen Xijiu should return home, and his daughter would be sent back to the Chen family. Relieved, Chen Xijiu turned and went home. Back when Zhou's daughter had first returned to her natal home, Zhou often cursed Chen Xijiu and his mother right in front of her, his words dripping with scorn and contempt. She said nothing, only turning her back to him and crying silently against the wall. Even when Chen's mother died, the Zhou family kept the news from her, making sure she didn't find out. Then, one day, Zhou tossed a divorce letter in front of her and said coldly, "The Chen family has cast you off." She picked up the letter, her eyes vacant, lips trembling. After a long pause, she asked in a hoarse voice, "I am neither a shrew nor unfaithful in my duties as a wife. Why would Chen Xijiu want to divorce me?" She wanted to return to her husband's home to seek an explanation, but Zhou locked her up, forbidding her from leaving the house. Later, when word spread that Chen Xijiu had gone to Xi'an, Zhou seized the opportunity to spread a rumor that Chen Xijiu was dead, hoping to completely sever any chance of his daughter returning to the Chen family. Unexpectedly, the rumor that Chen Xijiu is dead spread quickly. Soon, a man named Du Zhonghan came to Zhou's house to propose marriage. Worried that things might get complicated, Zhou readily agreed and even set a wedding date. Upon learning she was to be remarried, Zhou's daughter was crushed. She remained silent, shedding tears quietly, refusing to eat or drink. She lay in bed every day, covering her face with a blanket. Soon, her health deteriorated drastically, and she slipped into a coma. For several days, Zhou saw no sign of her waking, growing increasingly frantic. Just as he was at his wit's end, he heard that Chen Xijiu had returned and was loudly demanding his wife at the door. Zhou thought, "If my daughter keeps suffering like this, she won't last long. It's better to send her back to her husband now. Once she dies there, I'll deal with Chen Xijiu properly to settle my grudge." With his mind made up, Zhou immediately ordered his family to carry his daughter onto a carriage and send her straight to the Chen household. Chen Xijiu had just arrived home when the carriage bringing his wife pulled up. Fearing that Miss Zhou's poor health would make the Chen family reluctant to keep her, Zhou's family quickly abandoned her at the doorstep without a word and hurriedly left. Chen Xijiu stood at the door, seeing his wife lying nearby in a deep coma, barely breathing. Neighbors gathered around, urging him, "Your wife probably won't last more than a few days. If she dies here, the Zhou family won't let it go easily. You'd better send her back to her family quickly." But Chen Xijiu refused to listen to their advice. Determined, he picked up his wife and laid her on the bed. It was then he realized, she had already passed away. Shocked and terrified, Chen Xijiu didn't know what to do when suddenly Zhou's sons burst in with a group of servants. Each wielded clubs and bats, storming the house, smashing doors and windows, turning the Chen home into chaos. Seeing the situation turn dire, Chen Xijiu quickly hid. Zhou's men searched everywhere, shouting curses. The neighbors couldn't stand it any longer and came out to defend Chen Xijiu. Just then, Chen's cousin Chen Xijiu heard the news and rallied a group of strong young men to help. After a fierce fight, Zhou's sons were left bruised and beaten, fleeing in disgrace. Furious upon hearing this, Zhou stormed to the local magistrate's office to file a complaint. The authorities then ordered Chen Xijiu, and others to be brought in for questioning. Before leaving, Chen Xijiu, heart heavy with sorrow, entrusted his wife's body to an elderly neighbor woman, asking her to take good care of it. Not long after, the elderly neighbor suddenly heard faint breathing from the bed. She leaned closer and saw Chen's wife's eyes slightly move. Overjoyed, she hurried to call the other neighbors. They all rushed over and gathered around the bed, noticing that Chen's wife's complexion had turned rosy. After a while, she even managed to turn over. The neighbors were stunned and immediately reported this miraculous news to the local magistrate. Upon hearing this, the county magistrate was furious and believed that Zhou had maliciously slandered Xijiu. Seeing the magistrate's anger, Zhou became afraid and had to rush around, spending a large sum of silver to bribe the official to avoid punishment. When Xijiu returned home, he was overwhelmed with mixed emotions upon seeing his wife again. In truth, Chen's wife had been unconscious and near death for several days before. At first, lying on the bed, she was filled with despair and wished for death. Suddenly, she felt someone gently lifting her up and heard a voice say, "I am from the Chen family. You must come with me quickly. If you delay, you will never see your husband again." Chen's wife felt light as if floating, and before she knew it, she was outside the door. Two people helped her into a sedan chair, which quickly carried her to a solemn government office. She looked around in confusion but was delighted to see both her father-in-law and mother-in-law there. With a mix of surprise and doubt, she asked, "Where is this place?" Her mother-in-law told her, "Don't ask now. Soon, I will send you back." Unexpectedly, the next day, she saw Xijiu had come as well. Her heart was joyful, but they only met briefly before he hurriedly left. Chen's wife grew more uneasy, unsure if she was dreaming or awake. Her father-in-law often went out for several days at a time. Until the previous night, when he rushed back and said to Chen's mother, "I went to Mount Wui and was delayed for 2 days. Xijiu has suffered enough. We cannot wait any longer, it's time to send our daughter-in-law home." After saying this, he ordered people to prepare the carriage and escort Chen's wife back. Sitting in the carriage, Chen's wife felt dazed as they arrived in front of the Chen family home. The moment she stepped down, she suddenly awoke and, opening her eyes, found the neighbors all around her, watching with concern. The couple recounted their strange experience to each other, both shocked and happy. From then on, they were finally reunited but still had to face their impoverished circumstances and inability to support themselves. Xijiu opened a school in the village to teach children reading. When not teaching, he studied by himself. He often muttered to himself, "My father told me, heaven will grant me gold. But now, I'm still living in an empty house. Can I really become wealthy by teaching a few children to read?" One day, after Xijiu returned from teaching at the private school, he was suddenly stopped by 2 unfamiliar men on the road. The 2 men sternly asked, "Are you Xijiu?" Xijiu was slightly taken aback but replied, "Yes, that is me." Before he could say more, the 2 men abruptly pulled out iron chains and tightly shackled him. Xijiu was terrified and hurriedly asked the reason, but they refused to answer. The incident alarmed the villagers, who quickly gathered around and questioned the men why they were arresting Xijiu. Only then did the 2 men say, "Xijiu is suspected of colluding with thieves. The prefectural government has ordered his capture and arrest." Feeling sympathy for Xijiu and believing him innocent, the villagers pooled some silver to bribe the officers, ensuring he would not be mistreated along the way. Upon arrival at the prefectural government office, Chen Xijiu was brought before the magistrate. He truthfully recounted his family background. The magistrate was greatly surprised and repeatedly said, "This man is the son of a scholar, eloquent and refined. How could he be a bandit?" The magistrate immediately ordered his chains removed and resumed harsh interrogation of the thieves. The bandits finally confessed that they had been bribed by Zhou to falsely accuse Chen Xijiu. After learning the truth, Chen Xijiu recounted the entire conflict with his father-in-law. The magistrate grew even angrier and promptly ordered Zhou's arrest. Following this, the magistrate invited Chen Xijiu into the government office and spoke of the long-standing relationship between their families. It turned out that this magistrate was the son of the former official Han Gong from Pizhou and had once been a student of Chen Shijiu's father, Chen Zian. To honor his former teacher's guidance, Magistrate Han presented Chen Xijiu with 100 taels of silver to support his continued studies. He also gifted Chen 2 mules, allowing Chen to easily travel into town to seek his advice. Moreover, Magistrate Han publicly praised Chen Shijiu's filial piety within the prefecture, causing officials under the governor to recognize and respect Chen, many of whom sent gifts to show their esteem. Chen Xijiu rode the mules back home, where he and his wife rejoiced greatly. One day, Chen Shijiu's mother-in-law came to his home in tears and, upon seeing her daughter, fell to the ground weeping uncontrollably. Chen's wife was startled and hurriedly asked what had happened. Her mother tearfully explained that her father had been imprisoned. Chen's wife was overcome with guilt and sobbed bitterly, even contemplating suicide. Seeing his wife so distraught, Chen Xijiu reluctantly mustered courage to plead on behalf of his father-in-law at the prefectural office again. The magistrate decided to give Zhou one more chance and said, "Let him redeem himself by paying the penalty. He must deliver 100 stones of rice to Chen Shijiu's home as a token of repentance." After Zhou was released, he dragged rice from the granary but, still resentful and unwilling to part with good rice, he mixed it with chaff before sending it to his son-in-law's house. Seeing the rice, Chen Xijiu said to his wife, "Your father must think that the only reason I would accept this rice is because of my own scheming. That's too narrow-minded. How can he assume I would take such rice? And mixing it with chaff, this behavior is utterly despicable." With that, he smiled and waved off the rice, refusing to accept it. At this time, although Chen Shijiu's family was no longer in dire poverty, their courtyard walls remained broken and unrepaired. One late night, a group of bandits sneaked into Chen's courtyard under the cover of darkness. The servants were startled awake by the noise and shouted loudly. The bandits, realizing they'd been discovered, fled in a panic, managing to steal only 2 mules before disappearing into the night. 6 months passed in the blink of an eye. One night, Chen Xijiu was burning the midnight oil, reading by lamplight, when suddenly he heard someone knocking at the door. He called out a few times but received no reply. Feeling puzzled, he called a servant to go check. The moment the door was opened, the 2 mules suddenly burst inside, rushing straight to the feeding trough, breathing heavily. It was the very same 2 mules stolen from Chen's home 6 months ago. The family lit lanterns to examine them and found each mule was carrying a heavy leather sack on its back. Opening the sacks revealed they were filled with gleaming silver coins. Everyone was stunned, exchanging bewildered glances, unsure of where this silver had come from. Shortly after, the truth came to light. On that very night, the bandits had raided Zhou's household and loaded the stolen goods onto the mules. But just as they were leaving, patrolling soldiers caught up to them. With no escape route, the bandits abandoned the mules and loot and scattered in different directions to save themselves. Remarkably, the two mules somehow recognized their way back home and returned directly to Chen's house carrying the silver. Since his release from prison, Zhou's body never fully healed from his injuries. Now, after this latest calamity, he became seriously ill and passed away not long after. One night, Chen's wife had a dream. She saw her father wearing shackles, standing before her with a painful expression. He sighed, saying, "I deeply regret what I did in life, but now it's too late to make amends. I am being punished in the underworld, and without help, I fear I will never be reborn as a human again. Only your father-in-law can save me in the underworld. Please ask my son-in-law to write a letter to his father, beg him to help me." Awaking from the dream, Chen's wife was overcome with sorrow and wept bitterly. Xijiu quickly asked what had happened. Through her sobs, she recounted the entire dream in detail. Xijiu, who had already planned to make a trip to Mount Taihang, decided to set off immediately after hearing her story. At Mount Taihang, Xijiu prepared offerings, set up an altar, and prayed sincerely. He stayed the whole night by his parents' graves, hoping for a miraculous sign. But the entire night passed without anything unusual happening. Reluctantly, he returned home. After Zhou's death, the Zhou family's situation grew even more desperate. Zhou's wife struggled to raise their young son alone, relying only on the support of her second son-in-law, Wang Juren. However, Wang Juren later passed the imperial exams and was appointed magistrate, but he was later convicted of corruption. His entire family was exiled to Shenyang. From then on, the Zhou mother and son were left even more isolated and destitute. Seeing this, Xijiu took pity on them and assumed responsibility for caring for Zhou's widow and child. The author also included the following commentary at the end of the story. He said, "The so-called good deeds find no greater expression than filial piety toward one's parents. It is often said that filial devotion can move heaven and earth, and indeed, this is only natural. Some who pride themselves on their lofty morals, even if living a life of poverty, faithfully honor their parents without fail. Yet they give no thought to whether their own descendants will live in comfort. By contrast, some people, though also filial, force their daughters into marriage against their will, marrying them off to elderly men with graying beards. Then, in front of relatives and friends, they proudly declare, 'So-and-so is a senior official, my son-in-law.' Alas, how tragic! The daughters, youthful and beautiful, remain radiant even many years after marriage, while the so-called high-ranking official, son-in-law has long since passed away. Young widows forced to face such desolation is a scene truly heartbreaking to behold. Moreover, some young women must even follow their disgraced husbands to prison. Such a fate is surely even more pitiable. Alright. That's all for today's tale, Xijiu. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Please also encourage everyone to comment and share more. We'll see you in the next episode.